All right, starting part B, I will start with my side mirror, making sure it's properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked, bent, or broken. Nuts and bolts should be present and tight, and my glass should be clean. Then I'll come down to my side marker light. This is a marker, blinker, and a flasher. Should be properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. Nuts and bolts should be present and tight. Should be amber in color and working properly. Now come down to my side steps. I'll make sure they're properly mounted and secured. Nothing's cracked, bent, or broken. All my nuts and bolts should be present and tight. It should be free of debris and be able to support the driver's weight. Then I'll come to my door. I'll open and close my door. Make sure it's properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked, bent, or broken. I check that handle, make sure it's not loose or worn. It's also properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. I check my hinges, make sure they are properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. Nuts and bolts should all be present and tight. They're not loose or worn. Then I'll come to my weather seal. Make sure my weather seal is also properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked, bent, or broken. No abrasions, bulges, or cuts. And it's not leaking. Now go ahead and close my door. All right, next I'll come back to my DEF tank or my DEF tank and my fuel tank. Both should be properly mounted and secured. Neither should be cracked, bent, or broken. The caps should be on tight with the seal on the inside. Neither should be leaking. My fuel tank should be held in place with bands and clamps. And there should be no metal to metal contact. All right, moving around my truck, I'm gonna come on back to my steps and my catwalk. I'll make sure that they are properly mounted and secured. Neither are cracked, bent, or broken. My nuts and bolts should all be present and tight. Should be free of any debris. And they should be able to support the driver's weight. And I come up and I will look for my service or my utility lights. Make sure they're properly mounted and secure. They're not cracked, bent, or broken. Nuts and bolts should be present and tight. They should be clear or white in color and working properly. Now back down, I'll check my frame. My frame is both sides, and I will check my cross members. Cross members are everything that goes across to connect the frame. So my frame and my cross members should be properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. All my nuts and bolts should be present and tight. There should be no illegal holes, no illegal welds. Now, inside of my frame, I'll come down here and I will check my drive shaft. This is my drive shaft, goes all the way up and all the way back. Drive shaft should be properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. Should not be out of line or damaged. The U-joints on either end should be properly greased and not loose or worn. Right next to my drive shaft is my rear exhaust. Rear exhaust can go either downward or sometimes you might have a stack that comes up the side. On this particular truck, we have a exhaust that goes downward. So we'll check that exhaust and make sure that it is properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked, bent, or broken. There's no loose connections. There's no black soot around those connections that would indicate any kind of leaks. All right, from there, I'll just come outward and go ahead and check my splash guard. I'll make sure that it is properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked, bent, or broken. It's not missing. And it covers the width of my tire. Now we're going to go inward and we're back to an axle. On each axle, you always have suspension, brakes, and a tire. Starting with our suspension, we'll go all the way in here. And this bar that goes all the way across, this is my torsion arm or my torsion bar. I'll make sure that it is properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked, bent, or broken. Bushings on either end are intact and it's not damaged. From there, I'll come on out here and check my suspension just as I check the front one. I have a front spring hanger. I have a leaf spring. 2 U-bolts. All the way back there is a shock absorber. I'll make sure that all those items are properly mounted and secured. Nothing's cracked, bent, or broken. All my nuts and bolts should be present and tight. My leaf springs are not shifted or misaligned. They're sitting right on top of each other. My shock absorber is not leaking. And my rubber bushings are intact, top and bottom. And to finish off our suspension, I'll come back and I'll check my airbag and my airbag mount, top and bottom. Airbag mount and my airbag should be properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. My airbag should have no abrasions, bulges, or cuts, no dry rot, and it should not be leaking. All right, we're going to move even further in here to check our brakes or our brake system. So on our brake system, we have an air line and a brake chamber. And then on the back side of there, if I can get back there, we have a push rod and a slack adjuster. All of those items should be properly mounted and secured. Nothing should be cracked, bent, or broken. All nuts and bolts should be present and tight. My air line should have no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. Nothing should be leaking. My push rod and slack adjuster should travel no more than 1 inch when my brakes are released. All right, finishing off my brakes, I'm going to go inside of my tire here and I'm going to check my brake drum. And inside of that tire there is my brake pad. I'll make sure that they are both drum and pad properly mounted and secured. They're not cracked, bent, or broken. Nuts and bolts should be present and tight. My brake drum is free of oil, grease, and debris, and my brake pad is not worn dangerously thin or less than 1/4 of an inch. And now I'm back out to my tire. Remember TCP, tread, condition, and pressure. I'll make sure that my tire is evenly worn to no less than 2/32 of an inch. On my drive tires, I'll check that with a tread depth gauge. Condition, the outer and the inner sidewalls of my tire should have no abrasions, bulges, or cuts, and no dry rot. And then my pressure, I'll check with an air pressure gauge to make sure that it is filled to the proper operating level or manufacturer's specifications. Now I'm back to my rim. I'll check the inner and the outer rim to make sure that it is properly mounted and secured to the tire. Not cracked, bent, or broken. No illegal welds or holes. Then I'll check my lug nuts. I'll make sure they are properly mounted and secured, not cracked, bent, or broken. None are missing, none are loose. And indications of looseness would be rust trails or shiny metal shavings. And then I'm out to my axle seal. My axle seal should be properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked, bent, or broken. Nuts and bolts should be present and tight. It's not leaking, and it's filled to the proper levels. Lastly, I'll check my valve stem. Make sure it's properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked, bent, or broken. The cap is tight and it's not leaking. And then when I get to my third axle, I will say that I will check my third axle the same as I checked my second axle. Moving past my third axle, I'll come back to my mud flap. I'll make sure my mud flap is properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked, bent, or broken. It's not missing. It's not dragging the ground, nor is it rubbing against my tire. DOT tape is properly displayed, clean, and visible. The last two things we'll check on our tractor are our brake lights. These are markers, blinkers, flashers, and brake lights. They are both properly mounted and secured. Neither are cracked, bent, or broken. Nuts and bolts should be present and tight. They're red in color and they should be working properly. And the last thing I'll check is my reverse light. I'll make sure my reverse light is properly mounted and secured. It's not cracked, bent, or broken. Nuts and bolts should be present and tight. Should be white or clear in color and working properly. And that concludes part B.